So going down the timeline, in 1785, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Notes on the State of Virginia, and he wrote this book with no intention of it actually being published, but it ended up being the best statement of his own principles. In this book, he criticized the assumptions of the rich and powerful, the tyranny of the church, slavery, and the superiority of race in culture and government. During this time, slaves were tortured, and this was considered legal because the government said it's okay for slave owners to be extremely violent with their slaves, because this was the only way to get them to work without incentive. In the 1705 runaway slave law, this stated that if a slave attempts to run away or escape, they could be dismembered or penalized horrifically. And so they would torture slaves so they could make an example out of them, which would trap them in these farms. So by the time these documents were released by Jefferson in the 1780s, Methodists and Quakers believed that under Christianity, slavery was perfectly moral. Another way people would justify slavery was that it was the only way to keep the economy alive and people couldn't afford to pay for labor. Others are trying to explain that all men are equal, and that is where the controversy here begins. But Jefferson's point in this document was that blacks are inherently inferior to whites, and that will never change. So Jefferson was actually worried about the reactions from readers and knew that his writing would displease many people because of the controversial topics he discussed. And this is actually one of the reasons that he had no intention of it being published, because he was worried about the public's opinion on his piece. So one of the main points that he made was criticized on the most was how he said African Americans are inferior to whites and Indians, and that the biological difference between blacks and whites proved that blacks are best suited for outside labor. So he would nitpick about different biological traits that black people have that will mean that they should be outside working rather than white people, based on their skin color, different features that they have, and things like that. So even though this point completely disregards the fact that discrimination against black people in America is inhumane, so he kind of just didn't really talk about the discrimination factor and more that they are physically best suited for slave labor, but not that it's immoral at all.